When you picture a medieval castle in the dead of winter, you probably imagine a freezing, drafty stone box that was completely miserable to live in. With walls up to 20 feet thick and a moat frozen solid outside, it seems impossible that anyone could survive a harsh winter inside these fortresses without freezing to death. But the lords, ladies, and servants who lived in these massive structures weren't just shivering in the dark. They engineered brilliant, multi-layered solutions to trap heat and stay incredibly warm. The heart of medieval castle warmth started in the Great Hall, the massive central gathering space where the entire household would eat, socialize, and often sleep. In early medieval castles, heating this massive space relied on a central hearth, a huge open fire roaring right in the middle of the floor. Smoke would rise to the high ceiling and escape through a louver, a specially designed vented opening in the roof that let smoke out but kept rain and snow from coming in. But an open fire in the middle of the room was dangerous and inefficient. The real heating revolution came with the invention of the wall fireplace and the chimney. By moving the fire to the wall and directing the smoke up a dedicated stone chute, rooms could be heated much more safely, and the massive stone walls began to act like giant radiators. Stone is an incredible thermal mass. Once a large fire burned in the fireplace for a few hours, the thick stone walls absorbed the heat and radiated it back into the room long after the fire died down. However, bare stone walls can also trap freezing dampness. To stop this, wealthy lords covered their walls in massive, heavy wool tapestries. Today, we think of tapestries as purely decorative art, but in the Middle Ages, they were essential heavy-duty insulation, acting like thick winter coats for the castle walls. These tapestries were hung a few inches away from the stone, creating a pocket of dead air that trapped cold drafts and stopped the winter chill from entering the living spaces. But cold didn't just come from the walls, it crept up from the freezing stone floors. To combat this, castles used a surprisingly simple form of medieval carpet. Servants would spread thick layers of woven rushes, straw, and sweet-smelling herbs like lavender and chamomile over the stone. This thick layer of vegetation acted as incredible floor insulation, keeping feet warm, stopping drafts from below, and masking the odors of castle life. Then there was the problem of the windows. Glass was incredibly expensive and rare in the early Middle Ages, so large open windows would have let the blizzard right in. Instead, castle builders kept windows very small to minimize heat loss. They used heavy wooden shutters, reinforced with iron bars that could be bolted shut against the wind. To let light in without letting the cold in, they used translucent materials like oiled parchment, thin scraped animal skins, or flattened sheets of animal horn. Even with fires, tapestries, and shutters, the Great Hall could still be chilly. So the lord and his family retreated to a smaller private room called the solar. The solar was usually built on an upper floor, directly above the Great Hall. Since heat rises, the floor of the solar was warmed by the massive roaring fires burning down below. This room caught maximum sunlight during the day and trapped the rising heat at night, making it the most comfortable place in the entire fortress during a blizzard. But surviving the day was one thing. Surviving the freezing night was another. The ultimate medieval winter survival tool was the four-poster bed. Those heavy curtains weren't just for privacy. When drawn tight, they created a microclimate, trapping the body heat of the sleepers inside a small, insulated tent within the room.
Before climbing into bed, servants would use a device called a warming pan. This was a long-handled brass pan filled with hot coals from the fireplace. They would glide the pan between the heavy linen sheets, removing the freezing dampness and leaving the bed incredibly toasty before the lord and lady got in.
If you didn't have a warming pan, Heavy stones or bricks were heated in the fire, wrapped in thick cloth, and placed at the foot of the bed to keep toes warm until morning. Of course, architecture and fires weren't the only defense. Medieval winter clothing was an absolute masterclass in thermal layering. People wore linen base layers to wick away sweat, followed by dense, tightly woven wool tunics that retained heat even if they got damp. Wealthy nobles lined their cloaks and nightgowns with thick animal furs like fox, rabbit, and ermine, turning their own clothing into wearable sleeping bags. But what about the servants, guards, and lower classes who didn't have luxury furs or private solars? They relied on the oldest heating trick in the book: body heat. People slept entirely together. Servants would sleep on the floor of the great hall by the dying embers, huddling close to each other to share warmth. Many castles also kept livestock, like horses, cows, and pigs, on the ground floor or in attached barns. The combined body heat of dozens of massive animals naturally rose, helping to warm the floors above. Winter in a medieval castle was incredibly labor-intensive. It required armies of woodcutters, fire tenders, and servants working around the clock to keep the fortress alive. But through a combination of brilliant architecture, heavy textiles, roaring fires, and communal living, they conquered the freezing temperatures. So the next time you picture a medieval castle in the snow, don't imagine an icy tomb. Picture a bustling, fiery fortress that was surprisingly cozy if you knew how to trap the heat.